Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission here is always the same. We take a stack of dense source material articles, biographies, research, and we try to pull out the essential, the fascinating, and maybe the most surprising nuggets that help you go from just knowing about a topic to really understanding it.
And today, we're focusing on an artist whose name, for most people, probably just brings to mind, soft, gentle, light.
Claude Monet.
Exactly. But if that's all you see, if you only picture the water lily pond, you are completely missing the fire, the almost scientific rigor, and just the sheer intellectual willpower that really defined this man.
That's it. That's the core of it. Monet wasn't just the founder of Impressionism.
No, not at all. He was arguably its most disciplined and consistent practitioner, and ultimately a revolutionary figure whose late work, it directly anticipates modern abstraction.
And that's the paradox we're really getting into today.
Mm-hmm.
Most people picture the romantic artist, maybe with a beret, but the sources we've gone through, they paint a picture of an obsessive, sometimes even ruthless documentarian of nature and light.
Right. And our mission for this deep dive is to connect that radical artistic journey, that very systematic, repeated approach to painting back to his personal life.
Yeah.
We really need to explore how the poverty, the early struggles, the profound personal tragedies, how all of that shaped his relentless pursuit of capturing something totally fleeting through this incredibly rigorous, almost mechanical repetition.
He literally transformed personal chaos into artistic control. Okay, let's unpack this journey, because it begins with a young man who was not necessarily destined for the lofty heights of the Parisian art world.
Oh.
So Monet starts his life as Oscar Claude Monet, born in Paris in 1840. But the family, they moved pretty quickly to Le Havre in Normandy.
And that port city with its, dramatic interplay of sea and sky and even the industrial haze, that becomes such an integral part of his work later on.
But at first, it was just home to a rebellious teenager.
And a very talented one. By the time he's 15, his artistic talent is already a business. He's drawing caricatures, portraits of local people, and selling them for decent money.
Which you can imagine brought him into immediate conflict with his father.
Oh, absolutely. That's Claude Adolphe, a wholesale merchant. He ran a ship chandling and grocery business.
And he wanted a reliable successor, not, some whimsical artist.
It's the classic story, isn't it? The struggle between the commercial certainty of the middle class and the very precarious life of a creative person.
Luckily for the art world, his mother, Louise Justine, was a singer. She provided that crucial early support for his ambitions.
She did, but tragically, that support was fleeting. She died when Monet was only 16 in January of 1857.
And that was a huge turning point. He's forced to move in with his wealthy, childless, widowed aunt, Marie-Jeanne Lecadre.
And this aunt, she sort of becomes the accidental patron of Impressionism. She provided the stability and the financial backing for his early training, which let him pursue his studies instead of being forced into the family trade.
He starts out taking lessons from a very traditional painter, Jacques-François Auchard, who was a former student of the neoclassical giant, Jacques-Louis David.
And that detail is so important, right? Because Monet's eventual radicalism wasn't born out of ignorance of the rules.
No, it was a conscious rejection of them. He knew them inside and out.
It just highlights the sheer weight of tradition he had to push against. But the truly revolutionary mentor arrives around 1858 in Le Havre. Eugène Boudin. Boudin, a landscape painter, convinces Monet to abandon the studio entirely and take his easel outside. This was the moment of conversion.
The birth of en plein air painting outdoors. It sounds so simple to us now, but at the time, this was radical, wasn't it?
Oh, highly radical. Academic painting demanded preparatory sketches, then all this lengthy work back in the studio to get that polished, finished look. Boudin taught Monet to capture the momentary effects. The sky, the air, the water, quickly, directly onto the canvas. Monet later said he owed everything to Boudin. He recognized him as his true master.
So then he gets to Paris in 1859, enrolls briefly at the Académie Suisse, and he falls in with the right crowd.
The future revolutionaries. People like Camille Pissarro, Pierre-Auguste Renoir, and his closest friend, Frédéric Bazille, they'd meet and debate at places like the Brasserie des Martyrs.
But that Parisian life gets interrupted pretty quickly. In 1861, military service comes knocking.
And this conscription story, it just perfectly captures Monet's rebellious streak. His family, a bit estranged but still concerned, offered to pay 2,500 francs for a substitute to serve in his place.
Which was a completely normal practice for wealthy families at the time.
It was, but the condition was the sticking point. He had to renounce art entirely, or at least agree to become an artist who conformed to the Salon's idea of normal.
And he just refused.
He refused the money and the condition. He traded Paris for 7 years of service, enlisting with the 1st Regiment of Chasseurs d'Afrique, which sent him farther than he had ever traveled to Algeria.
Wow.
It was an immediate baptism by fire and, more importantly, by light. He ended up contracting typhoid fever and was discharged in 1862, but that experience of North Africa, it fundamentally changed his artistic DNA.
He later said that the brilliant light and vivid colors of Algeria contained the gem of my future researches.
And put some lead in my head. It gave him the drive he needed. If Boudin gave him the technique, Algeria gave him the obsession with color and intensity.
So he comes back knowing exactly what he wants to do. His aunt pays the final fee to get him released, and he heads right back to Paris.
And, initially he tries to play the establishment's game. He wanted to be a contemporary figure painter depicting bourgeois life.
He even had some early success. He debuted at the Salon in 1865 with 2 seascapes that got large praise.
But that taste of success was very brief. After 1868, the Salon, the official arbiter of French taste, it turned decisively against him. His work was seen as too radical, too unfinished.
So he was basically blacklisted.
Essentially, yes. He was actively discouraged at all official levels. He only managed to exhibit at the Salon in 1866, 1868, and then once more, much later, in 1880. He was persona non grata.
So the rebellion finally boils over in 1874.
Enough was enough. Monet, Renoir, Pissarro, Sisley, Cezanne, Degas, Morisot, they formed their own independent exhibiting group, the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Engravers.
Even the name signals their independence.
Absolutely. They weren't unified by a single style, but by their rejection of the academic jury system. They created a truly open show. If you paid the 60 francs entry fee, you could exhibit. It was an artistic declaration of independence.
And this is where the movement gets its famous name, not from celebration, but from total mockery.
It is. The critic Louis Leroy saw Monet's 1872 painting, Impression Sunrise, which is this hazy depiction of the Le Havre port, and he coined the term Impressionism in a hostile newspaper review.
He meant it as a total insult.
Oh, completely. He was suggesting the work was merely an initial, incomplete impression, not a serious, finished painting.
He was mocking the very idea that a fleeting visual sensation could be considered fine art.
And yet, that perceived flaw became their defining quality. The funny thing is, the exhibition, despite the mockery, drew about 3,500 people. The public was intrigued by this revolution in painting.
And Monet was immediately seen as the leader of this new school.
He was, even though that particular painting, which he priced at 1,000 francs, didn't even sell at the time. The name, however, stuck forever.
So by the mid-1870s, Monet has a name for his movement. He has a devoted circle of fellow artists, but he has absolutely no financial security.
None. And this early decade of Impressionism was just one of relentless personal and financial turmoil.
His personal life was just as chaotic as his professional life.
Yes, his relationship with Camille Dancier, his model and mistress, was a huge source of friction. Their first son, Jean, was born in 1867.
And his father, who already disapproved of his art, hated this relationship.
Right. So his father cuts off all financial support. Monet married Camille in 1870, partly to legitimize their son, but the money just wasn't there. He was totally reliant on a network of patrons like Louis-Joachim Godebert or artist friends like Gustave Caillebotte and Basile.
And that support was generous, but often inconsistent.
Very, and you see the intensity of his instability during the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. To avoid being conscripted, Monet, Camille, and their son fled to London, then the Netherlands. They were in self-imposed exile.
But this London exile, while it was forced on him by war, it was paradoxically decisive for his future success.
It was. While he was there, struggling, having his works rejected by the Royal Academy, he meets the one man who would secure his legacy, the art dealer, Paul Durand-Ruel.
Durand-Ruel becomes the engine of Impressionism's eventual success.
He really does. And visually, London gave Monet a whole new dimension to his obsession with light. He saw the work of J.M.W. Turner, especially his famous paintings of the Thames fog.
That envelope of atmosphere, the way light filters through industrial pollution and natural haze, that fascinated him.
Absolutely. The financial situation did improve for a moment after 1872, but the instability was chronic. He was constantly running from debt. There are records of creditors seizing his paintings, forcing him to rely on friends to hide his work.
And then, in the middle of all this chaos, personal tragedy strikes with just devastating force. Camille became seriously ill around 1876.
She gave birth to their second son, Michel, in 1878, and her health just spiraled downward. She was eventually diagnosed with uterine cancer. She died the next year, 1879.
And this moment, it offers this chilling, profound window into Monet's artistic mind.
He documented it. He painted Camille Monet on her deathbed. And it's a work that is somehow both an intimate tragedy and a cold, objective analysis.
The quote he shared with his friend Georges Clemenceau years later is just haunting.
It is. He confessed that even as he looked at the face of the woman he loved, the companion through all the poverty and struggle, he found himself systematically noting the colors according to an automatic reflex.
Can you even imagine that level of psychological detachment? To turn overwhelming grief into a clinical observation of color.
It suggests that for Monet, the objective pursuit of visual truth wasn't a choice anymore. It was a fundamental, inescapable part of how he operated.
A compulsion.
As the critic John Berger said of that painting, it's a blizzard of loss rendered in paint. It crystallized for Monet that his dedication to color analysis was a force that transcended emotion.
Meanwhile, the practicalities of life just kept coming. He's left with 2 small boys, no mother, and still very little money. He moves to the village of Vitoy, sharing a house with the family of a patron who had gone bankrupt, Ernest Hochet.
And this very unusual living situation becomes the source of his eventual stability. Ernest Hochet soon leaves for Paris, but his wife, Elise Hochet, stays in Vitoy.
So she's managing this combined household of 6 children and 1 volatile artist.
Exactly. And after years of this arrangement, Monet and Alice finally marry in 1892, after Ernest's death. This really marked the end of the nomadic, debt-ridden years.
And this period, marked by so much instability, led directly to his greatest artistic innovation, the series method.
The connection between personal chaos and artistic structure is so key here. Monet grew deeply dissatisfied with Impressionism's limits. He felt a single canvas could only offer a quick, superficial glimpse of reality. He realized he needed a method that could capture reality's movement.
And his philosophy drove this, right? He said, "My only merit lies in having painted directly in front of nature, seeking to render my impressions of the most fleeting effects."
And the only way to capture fleeting effects was through exhaustive, rigorous repetition. It was a methodical obsession, painting the same scene again and again. Not to fix the scene, but to document the constantly changing atmosphere, light, and seasons surrounding it.
He was imposing total intellectual control over a subject he could not physically control.
Precisely. And we first see this publicly with the Haystacks series between 1890 and 1891. He showed 15 variations in a single exhibition. But the series that truly captures the monumental effort of this method is the Rouen Cathedral series.
Ah, the cathedral.
Just between 1892 and 1894, this is Monet at his most methodologically intense. He wasn't interested in the history of the building.
No, not at all.
He was solely focused on the surface of the facade and the interplay of light and shadow across the stone. He produced 26 views.
And I think we need to slow down and just visualize the sheer logistics of this.
Yeah.
It's not just painting 26 times, it's a form of high-speed synchronized painting.
It was an act of organizational genius that bordered on madness. He rented a space across the street from the cathedral. He'd show up early and set up multiple easels, sometimes working on as many as 8 canvases at the same time.
So as the sun moved, changing the light from, say, rose to gold, he'd immediately put down the rose canvas and pivot to the gold canvas.
Yes. He was working on each canvas for maybe only an hour or less before the light moved. That means he had to hold 8 different moments of light, 8 different color schemes in his mind, ready to resume painting when the conditions circled back around.
Which might be the next day or even the next season.
Exactly. The pressure must have been immense. He was trying to catch this almost imperceptible window in time. He was turning solid stone into something fluid and ephemeral, using only color and brushstrokes.
It turns painting from a casual sketch into a high-stakes, time-sensitive, scientific documentation project.
It does. And this mechanical, rigorous methodology, which he also applied to his Poplars and Mornings on the Seine series, is what finally brought him widespread critical acclaim and, crucially, financial success.
The discipline he imposed on his art finally compensated for the disorder that had ruled his life for so long. So, with the financial success from the series work, Monet was finally able to establish the permanent sanctuary he so desperately needed. In 1883, he rented a property in Giverny, and in 1890, he was able to buy it outright.
And that purchase signaled the beginning of the great defining chapter of his life. Giverny was not just a home, it was a fortress of artistic control.
Located near Vernon, it gave him the domestic stability and the controlled environment that had eluded him for decades.
He converted a barn into his first spacious studio, later adding a greenhouse and a second, even larger studio with skylights to accommodate his huge canvases.
But the truly revolutionary thing about Giverny is that the garden became his ultimate motif. It became his living canvas. For 40 years, it was his greatest source of inspiration.
And he wasn't passively observing nature, he was aggressively engineering it.
Right. He was the landscape architect of his own artistic vision.
We know he exercised this intense daily control, giving precise instructions to his team of gardeners, which grew to 7 over time, detailing planting layouts, managing his botanical library. He was creating the very conditions of light and color he wanted to paint.
And the water garden, specifically the lily pond, was this massive ongoing project. He enlarged it in 1901 and again in 1910.
He treated that pond like a botanical painter's palette. He mixed native whitewater lilies with imported cultivars from South America, from Egypt. He created varieties of yellow, blue, and white lilies that would turn pink as they aged.
He was controlling everything, the reflections, the plants, the light exposure, to maximize the visual complexity.
Giverny became a closed-loop system. He designed the subject, he painted the subject, and the subject was always right there, waiting for him.
So once Giverny provided that anchor, that stability he needed, Monet could afford to risk it again. He started taking these solo painting trips that were crucial for his development.
Right. His financial struggles were pretty much over thanks to Durand-Ruel's success, especially in the American market. But Monet craved the friction of new light. He often found tourist resorts frustrating, believing his best work came from isolated, intensive study.
His solo trip to the Italian Riviera, to Bordighera, in 1884 is a perfect example.
He went alone for nearly 3 months. He called it one of the most beautiful places we saw. He described the light and the vegetation as magic a fairy tale country.
But that same lushness presented a completely new challenge to his disciplined Impressionist eye.
He found the density of the Mediterranean environment almost intimidating. He confessed to Alice Hockaday, "These palm trees are exasperating. Everything is so lush."
After decades of wrestling with the relative flatness of Normandy, the sheer verticality and density of the Riviera really pushed him.
It did. And even though he intended to paint citrus trees, he only produced one, under the lemon trees. But that 3-month trip yielded 38 paintings, and it definitively marked the end of his severe financial worries.
So after Italy, he turns his attention north. He paints tulips in the Netherlands, and then famously London.
He made 3 major trips between 1899 and 1901, often staying at the prestigious Savoy Hotel for the spectacular views over the Thames.
And London at that time was famous for its industrial fog, the pea soupers.
And Monet didn't just tolerate the smog, he actively adored it. He saw the fog as an extension of the atmosphere, a unique phenomenon that filtered and softened the light, giving the city its magnificent breath.
He was literally painting pollution as beauty.
He was painting the atmosphere itself, the specific interaction of light with the thick London air, which he saw as a beautiful envelope. He dedicated huge series to this: 41 paintings of Waterloo Bridge, 34 of Charing Cross Bridge, and 19 of the Houses of Parliament.
And for the Parliament series, he had to get a very specific vantage point, painting from St. Thomas's Hospital across the river. But these London series also mark a slight evolution in his method, right?
They do. While he started them en plein air, observing the specific conditions, they were heavily retouched in his Giverny studio until 1904. The fleeting nature of the fog meant he could only capture the initial impression on site. The final harmonization of the series required sustained, careful work back in his controlled environment.
And his final great painting trip took him and Alice to Venice in the autumn of 1908. Initially, Monet was very reluctant to go. He was worried about leaving his perfectly curated Giverny garden.
But he was quickly captivated. Alice noted that Venice was so beautiful and so created to tempt you. And Monet himself immediately regretted waiting so long, writing that it was what misfortune not to have come here when I was younger.
Even at age 67, he threw himself into the work with his usual methodical rigor.
Oh, yeah. He would set out by gondola before 8 a.m. and work continuously until 7 p.m. His 3-month stay resulted in 37 paintings, focusing on distinct series like Le Grand Canal, the Doge's Palace, and San Giorgio Maggiore at dusk.
And it was an immediate financial triumph.
A huge one. Upon returning, he sold all 37 canvases to the Bernheim-Jeune brothers for 12,000 francs each. This confirmed his status not just as an artistic pioneer, but as a major financial asset.
So the Venice trip was his last great departure. From that point until his death in 1926, Monet retreated almost entirely into his Giverny garden.
And the water lilies, they became his singular, inexhaustible subject. They defined his final, and I would argue his most revolutionary period.
The water lilies, or Nymphaeus cycle, was his last and most ambitious sequence. We're talking over 250 canvases.
And it's here that the methodical approach of the Rouen Cathedral series meets the intimacy of his own engineered landscape. And it pushes his work past Impressionism and into the foundations of modern abstract art.
Let's talk about that compositional shift, because it's the most important transition in his career. How did he move toward abstraction using the exact same subject?
He deliberately removed the traditional reference points. He abandoned the perimeter of the pond, which means he eliminated the shoreline and the horizon line.
The surface becomes everything.
Everything. And by modifying his canvas shapes, moving from rectangular to squares, and eventually to these immense circular stretchers, he forced the viewer's eye to focus solely on the reflective surface of the water.
You're seeing reflection, shadow, the surface, and the sky all at once, without a fixed point of perspective. It's profoundly disorienting and immersive.
It is. A 1909 review accurately identified this, noting that Monet had reached the ultimate degree of abstraction and imagination joined to the real. By the mid-1910s, he had achieved a completely new, fluid style that prioritizes color and tone over subject matter.
But this creative evolution was intensely difficult for him. The sources mention he was constantly reworking canvases, even destroying them if he felt dissatisfied.
Right, which led to numerous delays and postponements of exhibitions. The perfectionist in Monet never faded.
And that internal friction was made so much worse by profound personal loss. Ellis died in 1911.
And then his eldest son, Jean, in 1914. This left Monet deeply depressed, relying on his daughter-in-law, Blanche, for care.
And just as his emotional world was darkening, his physical world began to betray him. It was around 1913 that he started experiencing signs of cataracts.
Which is just agonizing for an artist whose entire career was staked on the precise observation and transcription of color and light.
Can you imagine? It's like a concert pianist whose fingers stiffen, or a chef who loses their sense of taste.
Exactly. His entire world, defined by hue and light contrast, was literally fading and turning muddy. As his impairment worsened, his brushstrokes got broader, his paintings grew darker and heavier.
And his color perception changed.
It did. Reds and yellows, which are easier for a cataract-impaired eye to see, began to dominate his palette, while blues and greens became almost impossible to distinguish.
So how did he even continue to function?
Through extraordinary methodical compensations. He labeled his paint tubes meticulously. He enforced a strict, unchanging order on his palette so he could find colors by memory. He wore a straw hat to negate glare. His painting process shifted away from fine details seen up close.
He was painting from memory.
Essentially, yes. Relying on forming the motif in large, generalized masses in his mind, transcribing them through memory and imagination.
And this feeds directly into that big academic debate. Was his increasingly abstract style a purposeful choice, or just a byproduct of his physical limitations?
Well, the consensus really acknowledges the visual disorder as the catalyst, but it emphasizes Monet's artistic genius in the intentional acceptance and utilization of that blurred, distorted vision to drive his abstraction. He was creating a new visual language out of necessity.
He resisted surgery fiercely, didn't he?
He did. His friend, the politician Georges Clemenceau, had to really push him. Monet was terrified of a poor outcome, citing the botched surgeries of contemporaries like Honoré Daumier and Mary Cassatt.
He famously said he preferred poor sight to losing a little of these things that I love.
It wasn't until 1923, at the age of 83, that he finally had the surgery. But the recovery was immediately challenging. He suffered from persistent synopsia.
What's MAMES?
It's a condition where everything you see is tinged blue. Imagine trying to paint a white wall and seeing it as ice blue. And on top of that, he struggled profoundly with the heavy, thick glass lenses he had to wear, what are known as aphakic spectacles.
And here's where that lifelong methodical rigor, that pursuit of visual truth, just reasserts itself with a vengeance.
Absolutely. After the operation, when he felt he could once again see the real colors, he became a ruthless self-editor. He systematically went through his preoperative canvases, destroying the ones he felt were visually wrong, marred by the colors he'd perceived during his cataract phase.
That's an almost religious purification ritual. He was erasing the visual lies his body had forced him to tell.
It just speaks to his uncompromising commitment to objectivity, even when that objectivity meant destroying years of monumental work.
Wow.
By 1925, his vision improved further, aided by tinted Zeiss lenses, which counteracted the blue tint. He cautiously began retouching old works, and ironically, those retouched water lilies often appear bluer than they had been before the surgery.
And while this intensely personal battle was raging, he was also dedicating energy to a patriotic homage during the devastation of World War I.
He was. Between 1914 and 1918, he painted the Weeping Willow series. These dark, emotional canvases were a direct tribute to the French fallen soldiers. Despite his age and poor sight, he worked intensely throughout the war on his huge, decorative cycle of water garden paintings, which he offered to the state as a monument to peace.
So when we look back at the entire breadth of Monet's output, what is the single most important definition of his methodological legacy?
I think it's the relentless, almost scientifically informed pursuit of light. His core belief, which he got from Boudin, was the necessity of en plein air painting. He was constantly emphasizing how light doesn't just illuminate local color, it creates it.
It alters our perception of reality second by second.
Exactly. He started by rejecting the rigid theories of the studio, famously saying he liked to paint as a bird sings. But that bird spent a lifetime learning how to conduct a symphony.
And that technique was always evolving.
Constantly. In the 1870s, he purified his palette, minimizing dark tones, favoring pastels to maximize luminosity. In the 1880s, he focused on the harmonic relationships between warm and cold hues. Then, after a surgery, he consciously returned to clear blue and green schemes, rejecting the garish colors that had dominated his work during the cataract years.
So the series method becomes the vessel for this evolving technique, using scientific discipline to capture the passage of time over identical forms.
And that allowed him to fully transcend Impressionism. By simplifying compositions and broadening his approach to color and tone, particularly in the later Nymphaeus, he wasn't just painting a scene, he was defining an experience of light.
Which created a direct line from the 19th century study of nature to 20th century abstraction.
It's the perfect bridge. Monet died of lung cancer on December 5, 1926, at the age of 86, and was buried in Giverny. And even his funeral was a final testament to his rejection of darkness.
Oh, that's a great story.
It's perfect. His great friend, Georges Clemenceau, insisted on simplicity. He arrives at the funeral and sees the traditional black cloth draped over the coffin. Clemenceau just rips it off and replaces it with a brightly colored, flower-patterned cloth, proclaiming, "No black for Monet."
A final assertion that color and light defined his entire existence.
Exactly. His physical sanctuary, Giverny, was eventually opened to the public in 1980, but his artistic legacy, particularly his late works, took a surprisingly long time to get recognized.
That is the great irony, isn't it? Those immense, broad, somewhat abstract canvases were largely ignored by the art world until the 1950s.
They were. They were seen as too decorative, maybe too soft, or just too strange to fit the narrative of early modernism.
So what changed in the 1950s that suddenly validated his final output?
It was the rise of the abstract expressionists in America. Artists like Jackson Pollock and Mark Rothko were also working on these large-scale, non-representational canvases, focusing on color fields and immersive visual experience.
And when they rediscovered Monet's late work, they realized he wasn't just an old impressionist.
They realized he was the spiritual precursor to their own movements. Monet provided the missing link. He showed that you could take something real, like a water lily or a cathedral, and through relentless analysis of light, turn it into a pure study of color and form. He was the intermediary between tradition and modernism.
And the financial legacy is just staggering. He is unquestionably the most famous impressionist. We're talking canvases commanding huge sums, Le Pont du Chemin de Fer Argenteuil for over $41 million, or Le Bassin aux Nymphéas exceeding $80 million.
Right. And the sheer desirability of his work throughout the 20th century also leads us to a crucial and much darker historical context.
The tragic scale of Nazi looting during World War II.
Because Monet's work commanded such high value and was so often owned by affluent, cultured collectors, it became a major target for confiscation. Jewish collectors were systematically robbed of their property.
We see so many examples.
So many. A Nymphaeus stolen from the dealer Paul Rosenberg, works belonging to René Gimpel, a French Jewish art dealer who was killed in a concentration camp. The sheer volume of Monet's work seized by the Nazis highlights its status as high-value portable wealth.
And while some works have been returned, the provenance of other pieces is still tangled, forcing these long, protracted court battles for restitution.
Which just underscores that Monet's work is worth fighting for, even decades after the war. #tag outro of death.
So if we trace this incredible arc, We see Claude Monet's journey transform from this frustrated, rebellious artist demanding solitude and visual clarity into the methodical master who used, scientific repetition to capture the most transient effects of light. His final years, marred by the twin tragedies of personal loss and failing eyesight, didn't stop him. Instead, they pushed his work beyond mere representation into the foundational language of modern abstraction.
And what's so fascinating is that his dedication to capturing reality's fleeting moments paradoxically required him to impose an almost military-grade discipline on his art, the series method. He essentially transformed his personal world, the Giverny Garden, into this inexhaustible visual laboratory, turning the ephemeral nature of light into eternal, world-changing artistic subject matter.
A magnificent life, dedicated not to the objects themselves, but to the air and light surrounding them. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.
And for you, the learner, here's a final thought to mull over. Monet painted his Weeping Willows series as a solemn, patriotic homage to the French soldiers who fell in World War I, and his largest water lilies decorations, the great cycle he gifted to the state, were noted as being technically unfinished at the time of his death. Consider how the theme of finality, whether the end of war, the end of life, or the loss of sight, drove him to produce his most monumental, enduring, and ultimately incomplete works. Was it the pursuit of perfection, or was it the resistance to conclusion that truly defined the abstract master?